Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Jen Reed with the Science Collaborative. I think we'll get started now. It's a few minutes after the bottom of the hour, and others can join us as they get a chance. But I wanted to say thanks to everyone who's here, and that I am joined today by Megan Brass, Lynn Vaccaro, Nick Soberall, as well as our NOAA Program Officer, Dwight Trueblood, and our partners at the Centralized Data Management Office. You're going to hear from a few different voices today. Just to let you know, after this webinar, we will be posting a recording. So we're making a recording of this one. And we'll post it and add all questions to our running Q&A document for the RFP. Both will be added to the funding opportunity page on our website. So if you need to go back and catch something that you missed or didn't get notes on, you'll be able to do that fairly shortly after we wrap up today. A couple of housekeeping items here before we get started. First of all, please mute yourself during the initial presentation. I probably have, I don't know, we probably have about 15 or 18 slides or so to give. If you could just stay muted during that, that helps everybody stay focused. And then please remember to unmute later if you want to ask a question. You can use the question function on the GoToWebinar console to enter your questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar. We'll basically be answering those at the end of the, after we give the slides. And the bulk of our time today is going to be an open Q&A session. At that point, we'll be answering the written questions first and then taking questions verbally or as you enter them. So we're going to start off with a quick poll today just to help us get a sense of who all's on the call. So if you take a moment here and just ask or respond to this question, have you helped write or led a proposal in response to a Science Collaborative RFP in the past? If you could just respond yes or no, that would be great. Meant to be a quick poll, so we should wrap up shortly here. And it looks like we're about 50-50. So we've got some new folks, welcome, and some folks who are experienced, welcome back. We appreciate that. Moving on, we have another quick poll, really wanting to get at sort of understanding who all is here, what best describes your interest in the Catalyst RFP. So that's the RFP we'll be discussing today. Please select one to let us know if you're just getting up to speed, if you've got some potential project ideas, or if you're definitely submitting. And again, this is just a quick poll, so we'll just give you a second to finish that off, and then we'll just take a quick look and see where everybody's at. So well over half of you are exploring some potential project ideas. That's a great stage to be at this point. Some folks are still trying to figure out whether you really want to submit or not. And a good 20% of you or so are definitely submitting. So we're really looking forward to seeing that. Well, that's the point of our webinar today, to help you all decide where you are and help you understand better this opportunity. So what we'll be doing today, I'll be spending some time up front, really outlining the Catalyst opportunity, talking about our timeline, what are the key requirements of this particular opportunity, and what the review criteria are. And then my colleagues are going to share some example projects to help you really understand what we're trying to get at with the Catalyst opportunity. And then we'll have time for your questions. We plan for about the last 30 minutes of the webinar for that. So please, as they occur to you, submit your questions on the GoToWebinar console at any point. So before we dig too deeply into the Catalyst RFP itself, we wanted to point out that there is also another opportunity that's open for potential projects right now, the Collaborative Research RFP. You can access that RFP as well as the webinar that we did for it a couple weeks ago. The recording for that, the written Q&A, and the RFP itself are on our website. There's some key differences between these two grant opportunities, and we really encourage you to dig in and select the best one for your idea, and then submit that idea to only one program. You can submit to both RFPs with different project ideas, but we really want you to pick the best opportunity for the project you have in mind right now from the Catalyst or collaborative research opportunity. So talk a little bit here about what we're looking for Catalyst, specifically what it is. And this table really speaks to some key specifications. These are one-year projects, so these are meant to be, it's a targeted investment, 1 year. Awards will range in size from $750K to $200,000. That's quite a broad range, and we do note that we expect that the upper end of this will be for projects that are involving more than one reserve, for those multi-reserve opportunities. So these are grants that are for targeted investments for advancing collaborative science, and we'll talk more about what that means in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about the specific timeline for this Catalyst RFP. So this timeline here lays out some key dates. The first one you should pay close attention to is December 16th. We require a letter of intent with this opportunity. It's due on the 16th. It's mandatory. If you don't submit it, you won't be able to submit a full proposal. And those full proposals are due February 19th. A week after that proposal is due, the manager assessment of the proposals are due, and we'll be talking more about what this means in a minute. And then we anticipate letting folks know about success rate by June, and we would like all proposals to start October 1. So we ask that all proposals plan to start then. So the next few slides are really talk about our required elements of the RFP, our objectives, and user engagement, how we engage with the system, and expectations for data sharing. So let's start first with the key pieces of what we're looking for in these Catalyst proposals. First of all, they need to include one or a combination of these core activities that are bulleted out here. So core activities include collecting and analyzing new data, compiling and analyzing existing data, or developing new or refining existing tools or products to maximize utility. Note that we're not meaning the Catalyst opportunity to primarily or exclusively focus on partnership building workshops or other engagement or educational activities, but they can be part of the Catalyst project. We really are wanting to focus on one or a combination of the core activities bulleted here. But if you need to, and it helps the project make sense, having a workshop or some kind of engagement or educational activity that enhances these other activities, they're definitely allowable. Catalyst proposals also have to address one of three objectives that we lay out here. They have to facilitate the development of a new collaborative science idea, or amplify or enhance an existing collaborative research effort, or conduct a synthesis for the NERRS system-wide monitoring program data that can be applied at the regional or national level. Some proposals are going to address two or maybe even all three of these objectives, but you must identify one of these objectives as your primary objective type for your project. This specificity is going to help the reviewers make sense of sort of the diverse suite of activities that could be proposed under this grant opportunity. So I want to just pause here for a moment for another sort of quick poll, just to get a sense, if you're thinking about sort of where your project aligns, can you please let us know which of the three objectives your idea aligns with? So take a moment just to select one, and it's okay to say you don't know yet. So again, a quick poll here, so quickly finish up your voting and you will see where everyone is. Great, we got lots of new ideas out there, it looks like. Over half of you are thinking you're going to facilitate the development of a new collaborative science idea. About 20% or so of you are looking at amplifying or enhancing an existing research effort. About the same number aren't really sure yet. And there's some folks who are looking at conducting a swamp synthesis, which is exciting because that's a good priority for our program. So we're excited about that. So let's pop on to then some key requirements for Catalyst proposals. So all of the science collaborative projects involve collaboration and end user engagement. And we've been looking back at reviewer comments that we've received from our past efforts, either supporting collaborative research or Catalyst opportunities. And it's clear that this topic here, the collaboration piece and end user engagement, is one of the key determinants to a proposal's success through the review process. Now, you have 1 year here with Catalyst projects, so we really encourage you to be very targeted, to be very efficient in your collaborative approach. So we have some ideas about how you can do that and think about a few of the key elements here that will help you do that. And then we have some project examples that can help you think about that. But here's a few things to think about here. Be very clear about who your end users are as you think about your project and the project outputs, what you're going to develop. We encourage you to be as specific as you can be, so don't use broad terms like coastal managers. It's probably better to specify that it's going to be the office within this department that oversees this process. Maybe it's a permitting process in this state. So getting as specific as you can with your end user really helps you write the best collaboration process, but also clearly helps reviewers see who your project is meant to engage and benefit. Catalyst proposals have to include at least one letter of support from an end user, and the RFP provides guidance on what should be included in that letter. But in general, really describing with their own words, so your end users should be writing these letters, how they've been engaged with the development of the proposal, how they see themselves continuing to inform the project if it's funded, and how they anticipate using the project output. Reviewers are going to be looking for personalized signed letters on an organization's letterhead that really confirms that end users have been engaged and that they understand how this work is going to meet their needs. Your project approach should outline both the technical methods as well as your collaboration methods, so how you're going to integrate your end users into the project. They should ideally be woven together in a logical way that helps the reviewers see that end users are going to be consulted at those right moments to inform the work that's happening, influence the key decisions in your research process. For a 1 year project, we really encourage you to be very specific and targeted and efficient in the ways that you're integrating your end users into that project. The RFP also requires you to identify a collaborative lead. That's somebody who has the experience and the skills to design and implement a collaborative process that's really going to clearly help the team generate and incorporate the end user input that it needs to produce the output that you propose to produce. So we're really looking for a combination of experience and skills that can come through in the 2-page resume that would be attached to the proposal. And finally, reviewers are really looking to the overall sort of scope of work, timeline, and budget to make sure that sufficient resources have been dedicated to support the process. So are there resources there to engage end users? Are there resources there for the collaborative lead? If they're not in the budget, explain how they're being supported and how they're integrated into the effort. So, paying attention to that piece is really going to help your project sort of rise to the top. We talk a lot also in the RFP process about reserve engagement. So reserves are sort of one important potential end user for your project, and your project must directly tie to the work of at least one reserve. So it's really important to reach out and actively engage relevant staff from the reserve or reserves with which you wish to work. And we'll be looking for the manager of those reserves. If it's one reserve, a reserve manager, multiple reserves, all of the reserve managers from those reserves, who will be basically commenting on how you've engaged with them. So we have a couple of mechanisms that ensure and demonstrate this tight alignment between a proposal and a reserve's needs. The first is the sort of list of management needs for each reserve. NOAA works annually with the reserves to identify what those needs are, and then that becomes an important document that's connected or linked to each of our RFPs. So when you look in the Catalyst RFP, you'll see that link to the individual reserves, and you'll be able to sort of look through and see for the reserves I'm interested in working with, here's their needs, or conversely, looking across all the reserves for the type of work you do and find some reserves that have that as a management need. The second mechanism we have for demonstrating this alignment with reserve needs is manager proposal assessment form. So basically, after you submit your proposal, you also need to send a copy to the manager of the reserve or reserves that you propose to work with. And then we ask them in turn to fill out this form and submit it to us directly. The forms are pretty simple. It's basically a yes or no response to these 3 questions that are on the slide here. Does the project address at least one of my management needs? Does the proposal demonstrate how my staff are going to be engaged in a productive collaboration? And does the proposal have full support, my full support as a manager in moving forward? So the manager says yes or no to those questions. So that's why it's really important to reach out and engage with the reserve or reserves that you want to work with really early in the process. Another piece that's really important and is part of the Catalyst opportunity is data sharing expectations. So as with all federally funded research, so our grant recipients are receiving funds through NOAA. We receive funds through NOAA and in turn regrant. And so that means that everyone has to comply with federal data sharing requirements. It means that all data collected and or created through a project supported by the Science Collaborative must be made visible, accessible, and independently understandable to general users in a timely manner. So as an appendix to your Catalyst proposal, you have to provide a complete data sharing plan. We provide a template. It's pretty straightforward. The template includes the 5 elements that are listed here on this slide. I won't go into a ton of detail right now, but you're welcome to submit questions now or by email later about data sharing requirements. Our Q&A record already includes a lot of data management questions that were submitted in prior calls for proposals. So I encourage you to look at that running Q&A first when you have a question, because often the question's already been addressed. But there's always new questions, and to help you all sort of think through the data sharing requirements and the questions you have, we at the Science Collaborative work closely with the NERRS Centralized Data Management Office, CDMO. And CDMO is available to provide guidance at all stages of the project, and including as you're developing your proposal. They will be archiving all project metadata so that we have a record of where your data are, but they can also provide, in some cases, data archival and data access services for teams who sort of need this service. So at this point, sort of in the process, if you just submit your data management questions to us, we can connect you with CDMO if it's necessary. But just note that there's, as I said, already a range of questions out there that have already been addressed, and there's that that expertise that you can access if you need to. Just want to make sure that you're keeping in mind that it's going to take extra effort to get your data and your metadata cleaned up and in the needed format to be made publicly available by the end of your grant, particularly since you have a year. So it's something you need to be really thinking about as you're developing your proposal and when you're successful as you're implementing your project. Our rough rule of thumb is that you should be assuming that you need 10 to 15% of your overall budget for data management and data sharing. But that could increase if you have sort of specific or particular kinds of data that you're working with. We also have listed here a number of data sharing portals that some of our teams have used. There's a wide range to choose from, and we encourage you to look at where the kinds of data that you will potentially be developing or collecting, where they're being archived, that might make sense for you to look to as a potential portal for your location for your data to be archived. But there's more, as I said, on the website related to data management and more details in the guidance in the RFP. So I want to move on here pretty quickly to our proposal evaluation criteria. Proposals are going to be evaluated based on these 5 topics. And then for each topic, there's 1 to 3 or 4 specific questions that reviewers are asked, and that each reviewer is asked to provide a score of 1 to 4 for each of these questions. So for example, under project feasibility, you see we've got 4 questions there, and reviewers will be asked to respond to those 4 questions. They include questions about the team, about the timeline, about the budget, and about data availability. The exact language of each evaluation question is included in the RFP, and it's really smart to look at those and make sure you've answered them in your proposal. Wanted to note that each of these questions is equally weighted when we develop a summary score. So that means that topics with more evaluation questions, such as feasibility, play a bigger role in determining a proposal's overall score. A little bit about the review process. All of the Catalyst proposals are going to go through a written technical review process, and then a subset of these will come together for a panel discussion of all the proposals. The panel has a job to resolve any divergent reviews, any outliers or different opinions, to provide then a rank order of the proposals and produce a summary of the proposals' strengths and weaknesses for applicants. The review process is laid out in the RFP process and supporting reference documents. So we think it's fairly clearly laid out, but definitely if you have any questions about it, as we sort of stop here shortly for questions, that's the right time to ask them. But before we do that, I'm going to ask Lynn to walk through 3 project examples to help illustrate sort of a range of Catalyst projects that we've supported. For each example, she'll have a few words about how they align with one of the RFP objectives and a few key pieces about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn now.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I'm going to, this first example here is a really nice illustration of how a project is addressing that first objective within our RFP, facilitating the development of a new collaborative science idea. I'm going to give just a very simplified sketch of the project to help illustrate a few attributes that I think could be useful to others that are, planning and just envisioning a Catalyst project. So this project began really with the Hudson River Reserve team. In 2017, they were particularly concerned about some big infrastructure projects that were being proposed to protect the New York and New Jersey harbor. And their fear was that the official feasibility studies that were being led by folks like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would not fully consider all the ecological impacts for the estuary. So for example, things like a big storm surge barrier that's shown in the picture there, an example from Europe, those could have impacts on things like tidal exchange, water quality, and the movement of organisms. So the reserve really wanted to, stimulate research in this area and diversify the available science, diversify the lines of communication for these infrastructure planning processes. So they convened a work group to really dig into this issue, and they began recruiting folks for a Catalyst project. So the core project team, was really led by a researcher that specializes in hydrodynamic modeling and risk assessments. And then the staff from the Hudson River Reserve, as well as another end user from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, were really integral members of the project team. And they also engaged a professional facilitator. We don't see that in all of our projects, but in this case, the involvement of a neutral third-party facilitator seemed to free up the other members of the team to focus on their areas of expertise. And it also let the reserve and other members, of the original working group and other end user participants to maintain their own views and positions on the issue and still be, an active contributor to the project. And the facilitator played that neutral convener role. And then, as you might expect, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was a targeted end user for the project. I will note that they were not a team member in this case, and as is sometimes the case with certain government agencies, they had some restrictions about being named on a proposal, providing an official letter of support, but the team did demonstrate that they had engaged the Army Corps, during the proposal development process, and I think that helped with the review process. Because this, really, the goal of this project was really jump-starting and stimulating, new research, they did put a fair amount of effort into their collaborative process. They did interviews with key stakeholders. They developed a project advisory group that was really based on that original work group that the Hudson River Reserve had kickstarted. And they've organized 2 big workshops to get input on key research needs, as well as to kind of aggregate and coalesce all of the available science on this topic. The project's not yet wrapped up, but they've really developed a good line of communication with their users, including the Army Corps, and they've conducted a whole series of analyses around the topics that their advisory committee has prioritized. And we'll be excited to kind of share out with folks as they release their final report. So that's an example of a project that's really trying to kind of kickstart something new and put a lot of effort into their both collaborative process as well as some very targeted technical analyses. This next example is one that I think is a good straightforward illustration of the second objective type in our RFP, the objective of amplifying or enhancing existing collaborative research efforts. This is a project that really builds on research at GTM Reserve, as well as some research at Apalachicola Reserve in Florida. Where in both places, there was a lot of concern about the health and sustainability of the oyster fishery. And there's also been a lot of active research on the topic. So when the Catalyst RFP was released, in the prior round, there was a team of researchers that had just started a big NSF project that involved a lot of fieldwork. at GTM on their oyster reefs there. And the research coordinator at GTM, as well as the team, really saw an opportunity to try to leverage this new field data that was really being collected primarily for more basic ecological questions, but they could potentially leverage that to try to address some of the very specific management questions that the reserve had, as well as their partners had. So their collaborative process was pretty streamlined. The GTM research coordinator, Nikki Dix, who's actually, I think, on this webinar, served as an end user representative. And the coastal training program coordinator at the reserve served as the project's collaborative lead. And together they hosted a series of consultations with an existing group, an oyster and water quality task force, to really get the necessary input for the project. So for example, that task force provided ideas around specific modeling scenarios that would address their management questions. The project was really about developing a model that could address those management questions. And that task force was able to kind of steer them in the direction of addressing some current questions around different, some specific harvesting practices, like whether or not a harvester throws back the small oysters that are below market size. There were questions around the impact of harvesting closures, and as well as questions around different restoration strategies and places to do some oyster transplants. Yeah, so this is a good example of a project that's really kind of piggybacking and leveraging an existing body of research and really making it applicable and relevant to some current management questions. And I'm going to go through one more example here before we provide just a few final comments and then open it up for questions. So this third example project addresses our third objective type. First, just a quick primer in case there's any non-NERRS folks on the webinar today. The reserve system has been monitoring a suite of physical and biological variables for many years now, and most of this data is publicly available. The program, the monitoring program, known as the NERRS System-Wide Monitoring Program, or SWAMP for short, provides a really fantastic opportunity to conduct analyses across sites around a whole variety of issues. So this particular project here, you can see the title there on the top of the slide it's led by Kim Cressman from the Grand Bay Reserve in Mississippi. And as you might guess from the title, the team has been developing analytical tools, things like R scripts, to help reserves process and see patterns in their marsh surface data, marsh elevation table data, which is a particularly challenging type of data to work with. It's not a straightforward analysis process. And the equipment to gather this very precise elevation data at the reserves has been a relatively recent addition to the SWAMP program. So there's lots of opportunities there to kind of dig into that data and do some really interesting things. So this is a great example of a project that is both led by and really intended to benefit the reserve system, and not just an individual reserve, but the system as a whole. You know, an important player on the team is an academic environmental statistician that was recruited by Kim, and they have involved some additional users, such as the Sentinel Site cooperatives and the National Park Service in their workshops. But they're very clear that the primary goal here is to provide tools that can benefit the reserve system, and not just and are actually very specific about which sectors within the reserve system and how they intend to benefit the research coordinators, how they intend to support the education community within the reserve system, which is neat. And we've gotten a number of questions since this RFP has been opened about how projects like this that are really looking to inform work across the reserve system, how they should reference management needs for these projects. So I thought I'd just quickly tell you how this particular project handled that. So in this case, the proposal did things like it stated, how many reserves have identified swamp and Sentinel Site data synthesis or better communication of their monitoring data as important management needs. So they dug in and they did, X number of reserves elevated this particular issue. And then they went on to also indicate how many reserves, in that big reserve management need document that Jen referenced, how many of them had a broader focus area of climate change as a key issue, just to provide some stats about how this project could be relevant across the reserve system. They also referenced some bigger planning documents that have been developed to guide work in the reserve system. There's a swamp plan, a NERRS research and monitoring plan, a Sentinel Site guidance document, to help make the case that this work really played into a system-wide need. So that said, they demonstrated how they could be relevant across the system, but they were a little bit more targeted in the actual implementation of the project. The cover page of the proposal, for example, listed 8 of the 29 reserves as being directly engaged. And so those are the ones who provided the manager assessment forms, for example. So while this is a big project, how was it managed? And like many collaborative science projects, they used kind of different levels of involvement and participation to try to keep it a little bit more tractable. They had a core technical team that handled most of the data crunching questions, with really the project lead doing a huge lift there. And they also recruited an outreach team that involved some of those other users within the reserve community, the educators and the trainers, so that those folks could provide feedback on the types of visuals that they would find helpful. And then they also had an even wider tier of reserves beyond the 8 that were directly participating. Another 7 or so reserves have provided data that's being processed and analyzed by the team. So they've really done a nice job of really demonstrating reserve-wide relevance, but also keeping the actual project implementation somewhat manageable. So that's what I'll say about that project. And there's kind of 3 examples, hopefully making those 3 objective types even a little bit more real and tangible for folks. And I'll pass it over to Megan now, who's been thinking a lot about different additional tips that we might offer for folks developing proposals.
Yeah, so we wanted to wrap up today with, as Lynn said, a few tips for proposal development based on some analysis that's been done, that we've done reviews from prior requests for proposals. And the set that you see here on the slide are organized around some key elements for the proposal narrative for the Catalyst project. So the first is kind of the objective and end user needs section, and just have a few points into here to think about as you're putting that section together. Really encouraging you to just find a way to keep it simple, clear, and focused, and identify the primary end users and be explicit about their connection to the focal issue that you're articulating. Work to demonstrate that you understand the decision-making landscape and people that are involved in the issue, conveying that through this objective statement and user needs. And just want to point out here that because this grant program is meant to address reserve management needs, it's absolutely appropriate to think of the reserves as one of the project's primary end users, even if the project is led by reserve staff. And the outputs and outcomes section, make sure that you do distinguish between outputs. So these are the specific products that you're going to be explaining that will be produced through the project, and the outcomes. So these are the bigger impacts that you're trying to achieve as a result of the work. We have a lot of teams that kind of mix the two up or put them together in a large kind of discussion, and it's much cleaner and simpler to understand, and for reviewers to confirm that they know what you're setting out to produce and achieve if you keep them separate and list them as such. Work to connect the dots between the management need, those primary end users that you identify, how the planned project outputs will benefit your users, and how use of the planned outputs will lead to those outcomes. And just don't assume that reviewers will understand something that's only implied, vague, or loosely connected. Be explicit about the connections. When you get to the project approach, as Jen mentioned, a really unique characteristic about these proposals is that you have to present a logical and integrated approach that includes both the technical elements and opportunities for consultation and feedback with your end users. that align in time and make sense. So for collaborative methods, I think it's helpful to point out that our typical reviewers aren't looking for scholarly citations to justify a theoretical collaborative framework. They really just want to understand why the particular collaborative approach or method that's being proposed is being proposed. So make sure there's a justification for the approach, and that helps them to confirm that it's appropriate and will succeed. So for example, it's important to go beyond stating that a focus group or a survey will happen. Explain why that focus group or survey is needed and how you know it's appropriate for the project and the end users you're engaging. As you get to the team and explaining who's on the team and why, make sure you explain the roles of those team members and use the CVs to, customize and demonstrate, customize them to demonstrate that the individuals have the right background for the proposed work. And then also, overall proposal presentation does matter, so make sure you adhere to all of the guidelines in the RFP. And as you might expect, proposals with sloppy formatting or grammatical mistakes don't review as well, and even if the ideas are compelling. So pay attention to those details too. So our last slide here just points to some program resources and support that could be helpful to you as you're developing your proposal. There's some resources on our website. And there's one in particular, two that I'll point out here. One called Characterizing End Users, which is a tool that guides you through a process of considering who your end users are and what are their needs, to then be able to translate this understanding into a meaningful engagement strategy with them. And then there's another document called Reflection on End Users, which is another tool that highlights some key questions to work through alongside your end users to help ensure that everyone's on the same page about the needs that the project will address and lay the groundwork for your collaborative approach. And there might be some other resources on our website that you might find helpful, like our monthly webinar series and our catalog of prior and current projects, just to get a better sense for what these projects or past projects have looked like, and ideas that have turned into projects. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. You see Lynn's contact information up there, as well as mine, and the email address that goes to all of us to be able to respond to questions as quickly as we can.
Well, thanks, Megan and Lynn. And folks who've already jotted down some questions, now is the time for us to really answer your specific questions related to this Catalyst opportunity. I think we're going to start with questions that have been sent in, and then sort of go, either you can raise your hand and go to meeting and we can call on you, or you can continue to type in, whatever you feel most comfortable. But let's ask if we could sort of have the first question here.
Yeah, Jen, I'll read off this first question here. Question about roles. Does the reserve need to be the collaborative lead, or can other project team members fulfill that role? And then sort of a follow-up there, if the reserve is considered the end user, can they also be the collaborative lead?
Yeah, two really great questions, or two parts of one big good question. So there's no requirement that the reserve be the collaborative lead. The only requirement for collaborative lead is that that individual can demonstrate that they have the skills and experience to, lead the collaborative process that's developed in the proposal. But if the reserve provides the collaborative lead, the question then was, can they also be the end user? Absolutely. There's no restriction there. So there's really no restriction on the roles. In other words, if the reserve's engaged in the team, it doesn't restrict their ability to be end user. It probably enhances the sort of case being made for them to being really engaged in the effort.
Sounds good. We had a question about data sharing plans. And a question about whether or not we could provide any guidance on potential pathways to protect sensitive information, for instance, human dimension-related information or other sensitive qualitative responses that might be protected underneath, an institutional review board process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to start, and then I'm not sure if Dwayne's on. He might be able to answer a little bit further, but we would encourage you to go through your IRB, Institutional Review Board process at your institution and sort of lay out your approach to protecting sensitive data and what you would make available. Typically, that would be then aggregated data so that individuals can't be identified. And just make that very clear, and then that should be sufficient. But I'm going to ask Dwayne, I don't know if you were on. I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, Jen, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, yeah, great question. And I will say that we have quite a bit of experience with NIH funding where we have to be responsible for issues of data integrity and anonymity. And we've worked with a couple of science collaborative projects where there has been data that have been collected that we have to ensure that we're protecting the identity of those that are engaged. So we can certainly work with any project that is collecting such data that it has to go through IRB approval or is protected under HIPAA, et cetera.
Great, thanks, Dwayne. So I think the bottom line is, make sure you're making it clear that you will have sensitive data and how you plan to work with it. And we recognize that there are some restrictions on what you would release as a result. Oh, do we have another question?
Yeah. So this one says, so for swamp synthesis proposals that address a regional or national management issue, it seems like it might be difficult to identify a specific end user beyond the reserve system. So if the reserve system is the main end user, who should provide the letter of support?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the example that Lynn gave is one good approach to that, and that is for the reserves that would be more directly involved in that particular project. You could get letters of support from those particular reserves. And that's sort of one way to demonstrate that your project, because maybe you're having reserves from different regions participate and write support letters that would demonstrate that national level of support and importance.
Another question here about timeline, whether there's any flexibility for this 1 year timeline. Would there be the potential for a no-cost extension?
So no-cost extensions are not encouraged, and we would like to see projects, and the reviewers will be looking, more importantly, for project scopes that are feasible within that 1 year. So feasibility, if you recall, when I went through the review criteria or the evaluation criteria, feasibility had sort of a number of questions related to it, and timeline and budget are, part of that assessment of feasibility. So my recommendation is to write a proposal that can be done within 1 year.
Another question here is, do you have a sense of how many Catalyst projects eventually led to collaborative research projects?
Ooh, so the question is how many have gone on to secure other funding, and that is something that's still kind of underway. So the first time we offered the Catalyst opportunity was 2 years ago, as the sort of first 5-year science collaborative that we supported was wrapping up. The Catalyst was sort of the opportunity we offered at the end to kind of engender new things. So we won't really know how many of those projects led to new collaborative research projects for a while yet. But I want to ask Megan and Lynn if you have anything to add to that based on sort of working with those teams and sort of where you know they are.
Yeah, I mean, the example I shared in Hudson River and the New York, New Jersey harbor, I know they've already secured some funding for some of those next steps that were identified through their process. Can't think of any other specific examples like that, though, yet.
Yeah, similarly for some of the projects that I've been working more closely with, the Catalyst projects, they've actually also identified other types of funding or other opportunities in the process of working through the Catalyst work. So I think they have their eye on some collaborative research opportunities down the road, but they've also got some other things that they've secured along the way.
Yeah, so I think that's an important piece to sort of draw out there, is that this Catalyst opportunity, while we'd love to see them all go on and receive collaborative research projects, that shouldn't be the only target for projects that you can think about. There may be other opportunities out there that are even better suited to what you end up doing that you could target and benefit from.
Question here about how many proposals do you expect to fund this RSP?
Oh, so how many projects we might end up supporting? So I think we'll probably end up somewhere around 5 to 6-ish. It all, of course, depends on the number of great proposals we see, and we're also planning to sort of make the decision across the suite of opportunities that will be available, including collaborative research, and later early in 2020, we'll have a science transfer opportunity. But somewhere in the order of 5 to 6.
And we have one more question that has been typed in here. So what's the difference between a Catalyst project and collaborative research projects beyond the 1 year versus 2 to 3 year timeline?
Well, I think the big things would be scope. So obviously the year, the timeline affects the scope, but also, thinking about Catalyst being very targeted investment for kicking off a new idea or extending something that's already happening, versus generating new science to inform decisions. Like having that time on the collaborative research just allows the sort of overall scope to be broader, bigger. Yeah, what do you guys think? What else would you say, Megan and Lynn?
Yeah, I think that captured it. I mean, I think the reviewers really did embrace the sort of the Catalyst framing, and they were excited about projects that were building capacity and really laying the groundwork for some interesting next steps with the Catalyst opportunity.
Yeah, that is a great question. I encourage you to, if you're sort of still wondering between one or the other, to really take a close look at both opportunities. And if there's still some questions, definitely reach out to us. That contact information is not on this slide, but is on the next slide. Maybe we can just pop over to the next slide, just as a reminder that there's, oh, okay, that one's good too. Megan and Lynn's phone numbers, or the email that reaches all of us. If something occurs after, as you sort of are headed home today or thinking about this, and you take a quick look through and the Q&A that's already posted, I always encourage you to go there first and see if your question has been asked yet. But if you find it hasn't, do please reach out, call us, email us, and ask your question. Are any other questions?
Yeah, another question just showed up. So in general, a collaboration output will be a publication, while a catalyst should result in a capacity to compete for a collaborative or outside funded proposal. I think looking for some clarification here on the difference between the two opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Well, the outputs we want to see are usable by your end users. So I would say collaborative research may end up with publications, but we really want to see products, analyses, tools, etc., that your end users can use. Can basically just take from you the day the project wraps up and go out and help them make a better decision, inform a policy discussion, inform their management activities. Catalyst, you're right, I think is that piece that we're looking for outputs that result in sort of taking something to the next level, so getting a project underway or getting a new effort underway, or the other piece is, of course, enhancing research that's already being done to generate a product that the end user can use. In all cases, our work is intended to benefit the end users, so they should be dictating what your outputs are. Hope that was clear. Maybe Megan or Lynn has a clarification that would be helpful.
No, I think that's along the lines of what I would say too. It's nice to look at the Catalyst RFP, I think, and looking at some of the example activities under the different objectives. I think it helps to clarify what Catalyst is versus collaborative research. So for example, under Objective 1, when you're developing new ideas, it's collecting a preliminary data and analysis to refine and focus a research question, whereas for the collaborative research track, you would probably be creating a new research question that's a little bit more exploratory, and you have a bit more time to collect data on and iterate the data collection strategy, and it's a different scale of data collection and inquiry than what Catalyst would allow. So take a look at those example activities in the Catalyst RFP for a little bit of clarity, I think, too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other difference I keep thinking about is, I think in both cases it's really important to have some research questions identified. Even with a Catalyst opportunity, it is meant to, support the sort of science and sort of research endeavor. But with the collaborative research opportunity, the expectation is that research question really guides the entire proposal, and that you will get close to, really answering that question through the course of the project. Whereas I think with the Catalyst opportunity, it's laying the foundation to be able to address maybe a more broad research question, and as kind of Megan said, get some refinement underneath the initial research question.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Further clarification. Thank you. I also want to point out here we're at the bottom of the hour. Encourage you to continue to send questions to email, but we only promise to keep you for an hour, so I do want to sort of hold to that. Thank you all for attending, for your great questions, and know that we'll be posting the recording of this webinar and the Q&A to our running Q&A document on our program website. So thank you all. Don't hesitate to reach out, and good luck in the writing process. We're really looking forward to seeing your great ideas come in and working through those with the reviewers. So have a great afternoon, and take care. Thank you.